Jason Zweig at the Wall Street Journal needs to pound sand. I cannot, my man Jeff just sent this to me. And Jeff, I'm actually going to talk to Jeff later today. So good job, Jeff. You're the man. I've been subscribed to the Wall Street Journal since 1992. And I just canceled my subscription yesterday. And so when Jeff sent this email to me, I had just canceled it. I said, and this is a perfect reason why I just canceled it. In some way, I'm hesitant to cancel it because I gotta take the Wall Street Journal and just ring them up because it's just an idiotic article that they're writing here to preach the fear mongering, and I just can't believe it. But it was painful to unsubscribe for the Wall Street Journal after 35 years, man. 35 years. The news section of the Wall Street Journal has always been left wing. You know, Jackie Calms, John Harwood, and stuff, and they go back and forth with the New York Times. Brett Stevens, he's not on the news, but he's on the opinion page. The opinion page I always loved, and I always loved the financial page too, so I kept it. But I knew it was left wing news rag. But the opinion page is just globalist stuff with the Murdochs, and I hate to say it, but the finance page. Well, here we go. So let's dive into this. I was stunned to read this because it's just idiotic. How to keep this hot stock market from melting your retirement dreams. So, okay, I've heard this a million times. The PE ratios are high. The stock market's at all-time highs. Oh my goodness. Oh, and I've heard this 1,000 million times a Sunday. And the PE ratio of the S&P 500 right now is about 25, 26 or something like that, which is higher than historical averages. But as I've done in videos in the recent past, historical averages are before the mass amount of people are investing in stocks first and foremost. All right. So you really didn't have a big egalitarian stock market contingency until about the 1970s when the 401k was coming in. We just did not. So you have millions of people investing, whereas before it was just the elites. And in fact, in the most recent book I did, published 2 years ago, I talked what the average Joe did to have any savings was in whole life insurance. That was it. They didn't have investments in stocks or anything like that. So it's just as silly to say that. Plus, stock buybacks are a big thing now. Stock buybacks are goosing their earnings per share because they're eliminating shares out there. So stock buybacks are a big thing. And on top of the lower interest rates, which will probably stay lower for history. I know people think the rates are going to go up. Well, they haven't, man. I mean, they're at 4% right now as a 10-year treasury. The historic 10-year treasury is about 5.5%. So that's a pretty significant thing too. So anyway, when you factor in more and more people in the markets, stock buybacks, which basically replace dividends, and on top of that, you have the low interest rates of competing assets for your money. There's a reason PE ratios are higher and, frankly, more knowledgeable of stocks. Remember James Glassman. Who's James Freeman? James Glassman. He had written Dow 36,000. He had written that in 1999, and he took a lot of arrows for that. But he's right. The Dow's at 43,000 now. You know, more people realize the earnings premium, the risk premium that you get over bonds by being in stocks. Just better educated marketplace for sure. So anyway, the issue that the earnings are so high relative to historical norms, that inherently means doomsday. I just don't buy it. I just don't. That doesn't mean there won't be mass declines. But then on top of that, if you actually look, I want to show you guys something because this will blow your way here. So check this out. So what Zweig is going to say is the S&P over the past decade has returned 15% a year, far in excess of its annual long-term rates of 10.3. All right, well, if we look at the start of 2000, what has the S&P 500 done? Its compounded annual growth rate has been about almost less than 8, about 7.96, 7.64, depending if you look at VTI or VOO. So since the start of this century, 25 years in now, the compounded annual growth rate of the S&P 500 is anything to write home about. It's just not. It's about 8% a year. And as such, you're sitting there thinking, yeah, you could make an argument that the last 15 years has been booming. It has. Over the last 15 years, compound annual growth rate has been almost 14%. But the 10 years previous to that was such a horrible, and it was the worst decade since the Great Depression. Again, for 25 years, the S&P 500 just hasn't been a rock star. Last 15 years it is, but this is recency bias. It really is. So Jason Zweig is trying to say it's recency bias for us to think that the market will give us these rates of return going forward. I don't think any investor thinks that. I hope not. But part two of that is actually recency bias to say the market is so much higher than it was over the last history. But I'm like, yeah, but history would include the last 15 years plus 10 years previous to that, would it not? In the last 25 years, the market just hasn't been as rambunctious as what Jason Zweig would say. But that's not what pissed me off. What really pissed me off about this is Don't assume high returns will last or you'll spend far less. I said, ooh, this is up my alley here. And here's these, I said, please tell me he's not going to cite Macquarie and Bernstein. And sure enough, he does, right here. Macquarie and Bernstein. I couldn't believe it. I was stunned how idiotic this is. It's widely believed that people spend less in retirement than when they're working. One popular rule of thumb is that you'll have to only cover 70 to 80% of your pre-retirement spending. That's what Zweig says is a popular rule of thumb. Dude, I've been a financial planner since 1998. I've never heard that in my life. Never heard anyone said you only need 70 to 80% of your pre-retirement spending. Not once have I heard that. What is real, what people say is, another version says you'll need to replace about the same amount of your pre-retirement income, 70, 80%. No one's ever said you only need 70, 80% of pre-retirement spending. It's just silly. But he's using that because he's using it based on this article from Ed Macquarie and William Bernstein, which he says that's nonsense. You don't need 70, 80% of your pre-retirement spending. And I'll show you that's foolhardy. If we read this book right here by my man Frederick Vett, I don't even know how to pronounce his last name, Vitesse, right here, my man Frederick right there, an actuary. He was a chief actuary of Monmouth Shepell, one of the largest human resources consulting and technology companies and one of the top 5 defined benefit pension plan providers in North America. So this guy knows a little bit about retirement spending. Not once does he say you need 70% of your pre-retirement spending. It's always about pre-retirement income. In fact, one of his things he says on the front flapper, which I think is interesting, most people never spend more than 50% of their gross income. They never spend more than 50% of their gross income. We're talking pre-retirement income, not pre-retirement spending, on themselves before retirement. Hence, their retirement income target is usually much less than 70%. Again, income. And in fact, if we look at, and this is just such a great book, lock and stock full of great information, which Jason Zweig won't read because it goes against the narrative we're all going to die poor. All right, but then actually the thing that pisses me off more than anything, pardon my French, is that what these guys right here, Macquarie and stupid William Bernstein are using, they're using, when they say retirement, that you need to cover 70, 80% of your pre-retirement spending, they're using this article as a primary source right here, this white paper that this guy from MIT had written in 2014. And because they said it in their article, Bernstein and Macquarie, they cite this as the preeminent source of retirement income. And the funny thing is, check this out. This is from Paterba's own words here. All right. Now there's issues because he cites bad data. Paterba does, and I've already addressed that 1,000 times. So I'm not going to address it here. But in his own, but it's actually a pretty good article. A white paper. I like that. I was able to print off a bunch of good leads on here for other white papers that are very interesting to me. But here he says right here, quote, Purcell illustrates this point in his report on post-retirement income replacement rates in the Health and Retirement Study. All right, so he's saying pre-retirement income replacement rates, not spending replacement rates. Part 2, how to construct a target replacement rate for pre-retirement income and how it might vary across different strata of the income distribution is an open research area. Again, pre-retirement income replacement rates, not pre-retirement spending replacement rates. And he talks about Brady provides a survey of the number of the key measures that arise in computing replacement rates of income, not replacement rates of spending. It's just idiotic to say we need 70% of our pre-retirement spending. No one's ever said that. It's idiotic. It's a straw man. Anyway, let's keep going here. Those who spend less do so because they can, not because they can, but because they must. They didn't save enough, says Zweig. I said, ooh, what does that remind me of? It reminds me of your old buddy Josh, because I've been doing this for a long time, dudes. You didn't come to some schmuck. And I might look like a schmuck in my t-shirt. I haven't showered, I haven't shaved, I haven't brushed my chops yet. I get it. I didn't just wake up in the freaking the trash heap yesterday. You know what I'm saying? So I know. I said, wait, that reminds me of Jonathan Clements in 2005. Let's see if we can't find the Jonathan Clements article from 2005. Remember, Jonathan Clements was a predecessor to Jason Zweig. Jonathan Clements, Clements had written a great book on financial planning, a great book that I think 2015, 14 that he published it. And I don't think Clements is long for this world because he's got cancer, and God bless him and his family survivors. And I don't hate Clements, but he published a couple things that are just absolutely atrociously wrong, and he needs to be held accountable rhetorically ways, if that makes sense. You guys say, dude, you hurt people with your stupid stuff. And one of them was saying you should basically, the 1% AUM fee for advisors is bad, blah, 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 blah. And then you turn around to go work for a firm that charged 1% AUM fee for advisors. I said, dude, freaking hypocrite. That pissed me off. The 1% advisor fee is bad, blah, 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 blah. I'm going to go and work for creative planning, who I think he charges more than 1%. Now, is creative planning worth it or not? That's up to you. I got friends who work at creative planning, and I think they are worth it for a lot of their clients. Is it worth it for everybody? I don't know. But to sit there and say 1% advisory fee is bad and then go join a firm that charges that, I find very hypocritical, and it's hard to take it seriously. But his book was fantastic. But then part two, my man Ty Bernanke is how you say his name, Bernanke. He had written this fundamental piece that changed everything for me in 2005 in the Journal for Financial Planning. And I've referred to this so many times. And Clemens does the same thing here. If I can come back to this article right now, I don't subscribe to the Wall Street Journal anymore, but I do subscribe to newspapers.com. And Clemens said, saving too much for retirement, don't be fooled by study. And he cites the June 2005 JFP article by Ty Bernanke. And I used to love the JFP until they went full woke and they put critical race theory on the front page of the Journal for Financial Planning. I couldn't believe it. I said, you guys are race mongers and screw you. And I got rid of my FPA membership. I no longer read the Journal for Financial Planning because critical race theory is Marxist liberation theology. And it needs to go in the trash heap of history like the communist plague that it is, that it promotes. Anyway, couldn't believe the Journal for Financial Planning was promoting it. It was crazy. Ty Bernanke, the study examined government data and found that as folks got older, their spending declined, but their wealth increased. This suggests that retirees voluntarily cut back their spending. And then he goes, then Clemens will just wrap this up. He cites this guy from retired Boeing exec who runs AnalyzeNow.com, a website devoted to retirement issues. The question shouldn't be, do older retirees spend less? The question is, why do retirees spend less? And Clemens goes on to say they spend less because they don't have the money, is what he says. What did Jason Zweig say? It's so freaking stupid. Those who spend less do so not because they can, because they must, because they didn't save enough. So this is from 2025. He had written this. Where's the date on here? 2025. When did Clemens write it? 2006. So Zweig is just basically plagiarizing, not really, but what Clemens wrote before. The funny thing is right here, Clemens acknowledges the reality. At first glance, the results, this is Bernanke's. At first glance, the results appear to show Americans getting richer as they grow older. Take households that fall in the bottom 20% of income. The typical net worth is 32% for those aged 60 to 65, 65 to 69, 43% 70 to 74, and 46% for those 75 and above. But Clemens said, but that's not right. Because you have to look at that. The result is people who are 75 and older, 43% of them are in the lower income quintile, the bottom 20% of income. Okay. The typical net worth for people who are 75 and older is higher than the typical net worth for the people who are 65 to 69 in the bottom 20% of the income. So even if the bottom 20% of the income for people 75 and older is more than the quintile would say, 43% of those 75 and older are in the bottom quintile of net worth, their income, their net worth is still going higher. I've never understood why he didn't get this. This was always a pet peeve of mine. When he wrote that, I said, how does he not see this? Oh, and by the way, that was from 2006. And what do we find by Edward Wolfe from, where is he from? Where's Wolf from? Where is he? New York University. He just published a piece in August of last year showing the phenomenal increase in net worth of the older population. So Clemens is running from 20 years ago saying these people spend less because they run out of money, which is inherently not true. 20 years later, Ed Wolfe from NYU publishes another fundamental piece that says, well, the net worth is growing for older people. That's just a fact. Okay, so maybe they are spending by choice. You ever think about that? In fact, if we go back to Bertessi's thing here, he goes hook, line, and sinker of how the people just don't consume as much. anecdotal evidence becomes large enough as it comes to empirical evidence. And then we can just look at our own survey for consumer finances. Check this out. We can go to the median net worth of people 65 and older, and you can see, and this is all in the same dollars. All right, this is all in the same dollars, $2022, if memory serves. What's the dollars here? It's adjusted for inflation. Yeah, $2022. We can see going back to when Clemens had written that piece right here, 2000. It doesn't give us 2000. We'll use 2004. The median net worth of that group of people 65 and older was about $275,000. Now the median net worth in the same dollars is about $375,000. Now it's a median, all right, so that's all people. That's 50% have more, 50% have less, but their net worth is growing and explicitly showing that their income spending is lessened because they choose to, regardless of what Jason Zweig, freaking Macquarie, and again, I just destroyed Macquarie's arguments. Bernstein's a con, but Macquarie I actually like quite a bit because again, they're citing this data from this piece right here from Harvard, from MIT, and even the own guy who wrote this thing says right here, he says, the CPS coverage, that's the current population survey, which purportedly shows, oh my goodness, so many people are running out of money. It doesn't, but let's just use it. It's wrong. But the CPS coverage of income paid out from defined contribution pension plans. So remember, a defined contribution is considered a pension. Interesting, is it not? It's not as detailed as in some other surveys. So the entries that Macquarie and Bernstein are going to use on the share of income from pensions, defined contribution plans, and defined benefit plans should be viewed with caution. A couple guys in particular raised concerns about the underreporting of payouts from defined contribution pension plans. Individuals with assets in such plans, but who are not taking withdrawals in a given year, will not report any pension income. For those below the age of 70 and a half, in which required distributions are mandated, this could represent a large fraction of the account holders. Those concerns notwithstanding, when of course we go back to show you how the CPS data was wrong, and they fixed it. I just find this funny because this is actually a good article. There's lots of good information here. But then Macquarie and Bernstein are going to use the Center for Retirement Research at Boston College as their way to show you that the people are constrained, and as such, they're not spending as much as they want. And how they use that, they compare the top decile of income versus everybody else. And they say, hey, the top decile income, while their income does drop, it doesn't drop as much as everybody else, implying, this is the conclusion Alicia Monell and Anki Chen at the Center for Retirement Research make, that the people in the lower income categories are not spending because they're constrained. All right, yeah, I would like to have a beach house. I don't have it. I'm constrained. Okay, that's a whole lot different than running out of money in retirement, is it not? I would like to have freaking 8 dogs. I don't have it. Well, because I've got a wife who constrains me. But I don't have enough space. That's a whole lot. I'd love to be able to pay for my kids' tuition right out with just cash money. I don't have the cash. I'm constrained. A whole lot different than run out of money, is it not? And by the way, even the people in the highest decile, the top 10%, their spending still does drop, by the way. It just doesn't drop as much as the people, everybody else. Well, and then what freaking Jason Zweig uses is this. Dude, it's just so idiotic, man. He uses this guy right here as his piece of evidence. Let's talk about anecdotal evidence right here. Dan Foote, who turns 65 next month, can vouch for the steady state of spending. Foote is a former commercial banker who retired 10 years ago. And he moved from pricey suburban New Jersey to lower cost Columbus, Ohio, but he says, I still have more time to spend my money. I think we spend the same as we did in our working years. Okay, well, he thinks he does. That's one person who thinks he does, not quite sure. Jason Zweig, pound sand because you're wrong, and it's just embarrassing how wrong you are here. To use Macquarie, who's such a good researcher, you're embarrassing Macquarie. I've emailed Macquarie a couple times, said, Macquarie, don't go with this. You're using faulty data. And one of these days, we're gonna go back and forth and do a debate, and I'll rhetorically bloody Macquarie's nose. I love Macquarie. He's a great guy. Big lib, but he's just wrong, dude. And he's using faulty data, and it's embarrassing. I just wish he would not, because this is bad and is being perpetuated out there as if it's freaking just like Clemens did. And I just, God bless. Love to hear your thoughts. Smash that like button.